We woke up in Fort Collins at the Best Western Kiva Inn after a rough night. All the mountain adventures had worn us out, and when we checked into the at-capacity hotel, we learned that the whole city was out of rooms. No problem getting ours since we booked in advance, but the hotel was bustling. I kept waking up in the middle of the night to the sounds of loud traffic. I couldn't believe how cheap the windows were. After I full-on heard a conversation in the parking lot at 5 a.m., I checked and the window had been open all night. Not just a crack, but completely open. Weird, but it's not something I thought I'd have to check when we went to bed. I'd also stayed up late editing the second teaser for the series, so sleep was in short supply. We got moving around 9:30 and caught our last glimpse of the Rockies as we drove north toward Cheyenne, then turning east on I-80 into Nebraska. We were all a little tired and cranky, but glad to be headed home. Sydney Supercharger is right off the interstate, but a bit lonesome in the side of a Best Western parking lot. We are in Sydney, Nebraska. Taking a little bit to warm up here, but we're charging now. And we'll see how much we need to get to the next stop. There are a handful of things around, but the most interesting is the Cabela's, and it seemed like too long of a walk. If we had had an earlier start, we could have driven over, and in retrospect we should have. But more on that later. We ate lunch in the trunk, then made pit stops at a convenience store and Walmart on our way out of town, and then on to Gothenburg. The great thing about the Supercharger network expanding is that in a lot of places you can already skip chargers and get more out of your range. We had been able to skip Cheyenne and make it to Sydney without that extra stop. We'd done it again after Sydney by skipping Ogallala and going straight to Gothenburg. What we didn't realize until we got to Gothenburg was that I wanted to stop in Ogallala to have some time around the nature areas around the Platte River, hoping for a little more hiking time. Now in Gothenburg, I was looking for something similar, but there wasn't much around. A police officer cruised by, so I flagged him down to see if he had any suggestions. He pointed us to a park in the north edge of town, and it looked like it was near a lake. The lake turned out to be more of a looking pond than anything we could play in, but we hit the playground for a little stretch. In town, there was a Pony Express history area around one of the original posts, and there was some more modern playground equipment around that. But as cool as that would have been to see, we saw it on our way out of town, so we'll have to check it out next time. Somewhere back in Wyoming, another truck had kicked up a rock, hitting the windshield right above the driver's seat. We were lucky that it hadn't hit the roof glass, and it hadn't seemed too bad at the time. But the days of driving and the cool rain hitting the hot windshield had a good-sized crack arcing down. I don't think it ever gets down into the camera's view, but it made it a sure thing that the windshield would need replacing when we got home. wrapping up here in Grand Island. Not too bad speed. It took a while to make the connection. I've noticed that in the last couple. I don't know if that's because the internet's not as strong out here or what the deal is, but it's working now, and we got a long charge here to make it from here to Sioux City. We pulled into Grand Island at 6:13 and plugged in. The truck stop is massive, and there are a few other fast food options around. It would probably be a pretty nice stop, but there's so much traffic in and out, the staff was stretched pretty thin, and it was a little sloppy. It took about a half hour to get through a 3-person subway line, but Joan and Michael found ways to keep occupied. Staggering, though, to see all these semis parked and running through their rest hours. I know it's necessary for commerce and there isn't an alternative yet, but like the orphaned oil wells in Montana, this is a huge source of emissions that just goes on all day and night, and this is just one of many across the country. After getting to 93%, we were now off the interstate, cutting across country and up to Sioux City. You get used to your typical surroundings, and it's hard to appreciate the beauty where you live. But being in the mountains for so many days made me so grateful for the rolling hills, farmland, and trees. And on these small roads, you could really enjoy it. The Holiday Inn Express in Sioux City was just what we needed after the 3.5 hours on the road. Clean, comfortable, and quiet, we got Joan to bed, and I went out to test this new Supercharger. It was a good layout with wide spots and a pull-in spot with enough room for a trailer. My guess is this was built with Cybertrucks in mind. I intentionally didn't plug in when we got here. I wanted to let the battery sit at, I think it was 13% when we got here, 12 after it sat for a little bit, and it kind of cooled off. But I've been charging so high repeatedly, I wanted to leave the battery at a low state of charge for a little while, let it kind of recalculate itself as it charges back up. We should only need 80% to get to Worthington, Minnesota, then about a 16-minute charge to get up to Burnsville tomorrow. So should be a pretty easy day. It all depends on what time we get ourselves out of here. All good, and looking forward to getting home. Originally, I'd planned on leaving early and getting home around noon. But we were tired, so slept in, had breakfast, then gave Joan one more hotel swim before getting on our way just before checkout. Alright, we're about to leave Sherburne. Got here with somewhere in the teens, leaving at 72%. But the subway is now closed, so that is one less amenity here. Gas station's still fine, but that's the only thing around here. And we are on our way. Alright, we are wrapping up what's turning out to be a pretty giant trip. And we figured since we're almost home, we may as well make one more stop for Joan to jump out and play around a little bit. We left this morning from Sioux City and drove up to Sherburne, Minnesota. And then we could have gone up through Mankato toward the Twin Cities, kind of a diagonal route, but this way we figured we'd stop here and then go to Albert Lea and then north from there. While we're here, we figured we may as well give the charge point stations a workout. We didn't really need a charge. We supercharged at Sherburne, but I thought let's give them some use and see how that process goes. They seem to be working fine. We aren't going to be here too long, but just doing a little playing and then we'll be on the road. And I think we're all ready to be home. Although it's been a great trip, the car is filthy, needs some work. I think we're filthy, need some work. So we'll do a more thorough wrap up at home, but for now, we'll catch you later. The couple-minute pit stop in Albert Lea was probably unnecessary insurance, but it was pretty windy and we were probably going to hit rain and I didn't know how traffic would be. But we left there and made our final stretch up toward the cities. Home at last and glad to be back. 4,584 miles total over 13 days, or 12 full days of traveling. Our total charging cost was $325.42. One new set of tires, then another flat, and 2 windshield chips. We really put the Model Y through its paces, and it was time for some deep cleaning. A few weeks later now, and I've had a chance to shower and reflect on this incredible trip. You know, with all the problems we had, one thing that was never an issue was charger reliability. We just pulled up to the Superchargers and they worked, and it's almost a boring given that you're not going to have issues with that network. And although that might be a little boring to watch, it's a super amount of peace of mind knowing you can travel reliably. They're also evenly spaced in most areas, and so you don't end up using the full range of your car. And it gives you the option of possibly skipping chargers like we did in today's episode. That gives you a lot more flexibility when you travel, and as the network expands, it's just going to get easier and easier. The patch job on the new tire from Browning is still holding strong, and in the last week we just had the windshield replaced, so the Model Y is feeling almost as good as new. Now, it did take a while to get the bugs off the front, and I was really glad as I was scrubbing that out over several washes that I was scrubbing PPF, paint protection film, instead of scratching into the paint. Another thing I noticed is that hotels that offer level 2 charging or even a 240 volt plug are going to be the preferred stops on road trips in the future. It was really great to have the hotels we did that had destination charging, and all of those hotels, whether they were near superchargers or had destination chargers at them, there were plenty of EVs in the parking lots. Other than Shelby, Montana, which even there, I did see another Model Y up there. So really, that's going to be a huge thing for hotels, a huge selling point in the future. And even if it's not hosted by the hotel, you know, people are willing to pay as long as they have that convenience of knowing they can wake up to a full battery in the morning. So I think that's going to be a thing that really takes off in the coming years, and we'll see more and more of that. It's definitely something EV owners are searching for when they're planning their trips. This is the first trip I've ever had with tire issues, so to have 2 in one road trip is pretty extraordinary. And with those challenges, a lot of people were asking if this changed my mind about the spare. The Teslas do not come with a spare, and a lot of modern cars aren't coming with spares anymore. So I'm definitely going to be looking into the modern spare. I've heard people have had luck with that. It's maybe a little smaller, but can get you a little bit on your way. And so I'll look into that. If I end up getting it, I'll share that in a future video. In the meantime, if I do another trip, I'll just keep a plug kit that my brother bought me from Napa Auto Parts. I have got a new plug kit now in the car, and I'll take my compressor. So we'll at least be as prepared as we were on this trip. We'll go back in the studio and check out the stats from the trip in a second. But if you're not interested in that, I want to give you this before you leave, that the world and this country are so incredibly beautiful, and it's never been easier to go out in an EV and enjoy that in peace and quiet and no fumes. It's really worth exploring and seeing mountains and sunsets and the wildlife in person is just a completely different experience. And it really makes you appreciate it in a completely different way. After doing several of these monster road trips in an EV to prove that you can, I think family vacations in the future are going to be a little bit different, where maybe we'll do Glacier or Yellowstone or Rocky Mountain National Park, but do them independently and spend more days enjoying one place more deeply. It's cool that you can go all this crazy route, through the mountains and do it all in an EV and do it pretty quickly. But I think that point has kind of been proven. We kind of rushed through some beautiful areas. And in the future, I'd like to spend more time really just soaking up the atmosphere. That way, if we have a bad tire day, we have other days where we can make up for that with sightseeing. Now on to the stats, and there were some real surprises in here for me. So some things about some different driving habits I have that I didn't realize till I looked at this in a big group. But I'll be showing a spreadsheet, and in that I'll try to make this available as a PDF that you can find. Look for a place in the description where I'll have hopefully a link to where you can find it. Now the columns in blue to the left are, kind of the locations, where we were going to where we were arriving, and then the mileage, the watt hours per mile where I had it, and the total miles tallying up. Then the orange is just something I thought would be really fun to have the elevation and kind of watch that. Hopefully you enjoyed that too. It was a little silly, but I thought it was kind of fun just to see the delta of how low we were starting, how high we were going, and kind of that path up and down. It also made me realize that the areas in Montana are not nearly as high as I thought they were. I thought the mountains just got taller and taller as you went north up to Alaska, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So pretty interesting, to me anyway. Then in yellow, I have the departure state of charge, arrival state of charge, and the charge used. So that kind of tells you how each trip went, and I'll talk about why I find that interesting later at the bottom. The green is kind of the charge time once we got there, how long were we on the chargers, how much we gained, and then what we left and what that charge cost was. Now you'll see under charge time especially, there are some different colors here. And I've got a key at the bottom, but I'll just run through this quickly. The pink indicates places where we were there longer than we were charging. So if we pulled off the charger but had to do another diaper change or needed to run somewhere else quick, that was included in our stop time, but we weren't necessarily charging that whole time. So you can see there are a few of these that are fairly long, but that wasn't plugged in the whole time. The lighter teal is level 2 charging, so you'll see a couple of those are 9 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours and 40 minutes. So some pretty good lengths there, but that was level 2 slow charging like you do at home in your garage overnight. That was at the hotels. The dark teal is when we were in Browning and I plugged into a 120 volt socket on the outside of their building, which was very gracious of them. And really that got us no charge, but it kind of kept things from degrading anymore. So with the car opening and shutting and all that stuff, kind of as we were doing the tire thing, just getting that extra little bit in helped keep the climate control and everything, and left. And we were able to leave Browning with the same amount as when we got there. Overnight, you'd get like 4 or 5 miles an hour, but obviously we were there in the middle of the day. There are some sections here where I either didn't have the data, so it's blank, or the data wasn't applicable for that type of day or what we were doing. So I left those blank, and I kept those things out of the averages and things you'll see at the bottom. And then the magenta section here that kind of spans the departure state of charge all the way over to left the charger with. Those were wild guesses. I didn't take any records at that stop, and so it just kind of left me with a vague guess of we probably did something like this. But again, I left most of that out of the averages because it wasn't any hard or fast numbers I could really corroborate. And then you can see this teal stripe shows the averages. Really, it's not all averages. It's kind of what I wanted to know out of each column. So we'll run through that. Depart time and arrival time, obviously that fluctuated wildly throughout the day, and all the stops. So there wasn't really anything that could be gleaned from that. But travel time I thought was pretty interesting. Our average travel time was 1 hour and 56 minutes. So basically between chargers, usually we were taking about 2 hours. And that seems pretty comfortable. It wasn't, we have to charge all the time, but, with a little girl with us, it was a pretty good pace. Obviously, we had some longer, some shorter, but I was happy to see that most of the time we were traveling about 2 hours at a stretch. And it looks like 1 hour was the shortest, and 3 hours and 29 minutes, 3.5 hours, was basically the longest. It really surprised me that the average trip in miles was only 100, and it felt like we were going longer stretches than that. But in a lot of places, the chargers are about every 100 miles apart. And so across North Dakota, we hit all of those. Those are all 90-something miles apart. So it kind of makes sense in retrospect, but I figured that would be longer, especially with the basically 2 hours of travel time between. But there is some sightseeing and stuff built into that travel time. Our shortest trip was coming from Estes Park down to Loveland. That was 37.5 miles, and that was just a top-off charge to get us set for the next day. And we hadn't even needed to stop in Estes Park if we didn't need to check the tire and change a diaper. So that would have been a much longer trip without that section. And then our longest was about 200 miles, 199.3 miles. So again, with the chargers, being available, we didn't need to use the full, 300 miles of the vehicle. Our total trip watt hour per mile was 316, with 393 being our worst and 145 being our best. Again, that was that short trip between Estes Park and Loveland, Colorado, where we were just going down the mountainside. So pretty easy to get 145 in that scenario. And like I said, the elevation, I just found that really interesting. The delta from the lowest point to our highest point was 11,279 feet. And there are 5,280 feet in a mile, so that means we traveled vertically 2 miles and 719 feet, which I think is pretty cool. And I said it when we were on top of the Rocky Mountain National Park, that it's incredible how EVs just have no combustion, therefore they have all their power, even at the very top of the mountain. Very cool. Now onto this yellow section, which again, this is the big learning for me, is that our average state of departure was 83%, and our average arrival state of charge was 31%, which means I was charging up way more than I really needed to in most cases, and getting to chargers with a lot of extra charge, because we only used about 55% in the average trip. So as much as I think, I'm really good about, not charging too much and getting down into the single digits when I approach a charger, apparently that's not the case. Now, we were in unusual situations where I'm not used to these big elevation changes. I didn't know how much it would affect things, and so I was adding some buffer in, but I didn't realize it was that much buffer. When we look at our arrival state of charge, I had a 6% and I think a 9% at one point. And so those were kind of the low, but there were only like 3 instances of it being anywhere near that low. Most of them were in the 20s or 30s when we arrived at a charger, which is really too high. So we wasted time at chargers that we didn't need to. 65 was our highest state of charge arrival, but again, that was that weird Estes Park to Loveland, Colorado section where we really weren't burning anything going down the mountain, and we just were topping up for the night. So that's kind of an outlier on the high end. And that brings us to our lowest used charge on a trip was 8%. That was that same trip. And our highest was 88. So we did have a couple trips that were pretty long, and we were going pretty deep into the battery. But that average of using only 55% tells me charging up to 83%, again on average, was probably too high, and we could have left earlier. That takes us to our charge time. 31 minutes was the average. 7 minutes was the shortest. That was just a plug and go quick in Big Sky, Montana. And then 1 hour and 13 minutes was the longest. But again, that was one of those where we unplugged, and I don't have the difference in time from when we actually unplugged to when we left. So I'm still calling it that as our longest charge. And the average charge we gained was 55%. So like I was saying, because we didn't need all of that charge we were getting at each stop. So going back to that charge time, if our average was 31 minutes, but we were charging up too much, chances are what we should have been getting was around 25 minutes to 28 minutes as my best guess. So we could have shaved a lot of time off of, our charging in the trip had I been a little more vigilant about only getting what we need and maybe trusting the systems a little more. So our average charge gained was 54%, minimum of 12%. I think that was probably Estes Park or Big Sky, where we didn't really need anything. And 84 was the max, which would have been one of those longer charge sessions. And on average, we left the chargers with about 83%, with 51 being our lowest percentage when we were almost home and I knew the roads and what we were going to be getting into. And then 100 obviously being the highest. The couple times we did charge up to 100%. And our charge cost total came out to $325.42, and that includes all the Supercharger fees as well as the two $10 fees in Shelby, Montana at the hotel there. Really not bad at all. The average was $9.30, and the lowest was $2.43. The highest was $17.55. And some states charge for power differently than others. So some states, like Minnesota, is more expensive than, I believe, North Dakota. And I think that's because some states charge for the time you're there rather than the power you're getting. And you just deal with it. But the average being $9.30 for a charge isn't too shabby. So I figured it out in that if you were to do this same trip in a gas car that got 30 miles per gallon and gas was at $3, that would cost $458.40. So even with me charging too much at most of these places, it was still significantly cheaper than driving a gas car. Those are my big takeaways from the data. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, I learned a little something about my charging habits and maybe something I need to work on as far as not staying at a charger too long. But it's all what you're comfortable with, and the good thing, like I said, with the charging network being there is you have options. If you have further questions about the data or how I got to some of these conclusions, feel free to join me on Wednesday nights on my live stream, where I call it Everyone's an Expert, because everyone online is an expert and seems to know everything about everything. I don't, but I know when we put our heads together that we can usually come to some pretty good conclusions. So if you have questions about the spreadsheet or want to ask other questions about the road trip, feel free to join me there, post something in the chat or in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to get to it as soon as I can. Thank you so much for joining me through this incredible trip. I've appreciated all of the comments and support, both from the Tesla owners groups and from people online in the comments sections or on Twitter. So it was fabulous to feel like there was a community kind of cheering us on through it, and then as these videos were being produced. So I appreciate that. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. These do take quite a while to put together, and it helps grow the channel, so I'd appreciate that. If you're not ready to yet, stick around for more videos, and hopefully you will eventually. But thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments. I do try to answer questions if I can. I've got a lot of fun stuff planned for the future. There's going to be some fun other smaller scale but fun road trips coming up. So stick around for those. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.